research and related capacity strengthening division at APHRC. And part of this work is really speaking to what we try and do in terms of population and health research centers. I would like to welcome you on behalf of the EU-Africa Permed Consortia, which was formed to build links between Europe and Africa in personalized medicine. As you've heard from the video, for those of you who watched the video that was on, Africa continues to experience a comparatively high burden of disease, in particular infectious diseases such as malaria, HIV/AIDS, and non-communicable diseases like cancer, hypertension, cardiovascular, and diabetes affect at least 1 billion people, which has led and leads to over $800 billion in annual productivity. As such, Africa needs to explore new models and tools for managing the disease burden on the continent. Precision medicine offers the opportunity to utilize new tools, and today, I'm pleased to have with me members of the consortia, as well as practitioners in personalized medicine, who will disseminate good practice examples in relation to the implementation of precision medicine approaches on the continent. The webinar will start with an introduction to the project by Paula Garcia, who is a project manager from the European Clinical Research Infrastructure Network, ECRIN, one of the consortia partners. That introduction will be followed by presentations by our three panelists, Dr. Yao Bidiako, who is co-founder and CEO, Yamachi Biotech, Ghana. Yao is a Ghanaian immunologist, a biotech entrepreneur, and a faculty member at the West African Center for Cell Biology of Infectious Pathogens, WACBIP, at the University of Ghana. We are also joined by Dr. Godfrey Sama Filippo, who is a research and patient outcome coordinator at the East Central and Southern African EXA Health Community. He is a global surgery fellow at the Center for Health Equity in Surgery and works closely to think about how to implement precision medicine in his work. Lastly, we have Professor Julie Makani, who is a physician scientist from Muhimbili University of Health and Allied Sciences. Her areas of interest are hematology in terms of a clinical area, with a main focus on sickle cell disease. Professor Julie has published extensively in this area and is an established member of a number of networks, both nationally and regionally and at global level, one of which is the H3A Bionet Genomic Research Network. She serves as the principal investigator of the Sickle Cell Program in Muhimbili and Sickle Pan-African Research Consortia Clinical Coordinating Center, which is embedded within the Sickle in Africa network. I will therefore now invite Paula to do her presentation on what the project is about as we start. And I do welcome you again for this webinar. Thank you. Paula?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Evelyn, and welcome everybody to this webinar. So I just want to confirm everybody can see the slides, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful. So welcome, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Paula Garcia. I am a project manager and I work at ECRIN, which is one of the partner institutions of the EU-Africa Permed project. And today, before diving into the core of this webinar, we wanted to give you a very brief introduction to the EU-Africa Permed project so that you know what it is about and you know what to expect from the project in the coming months. So really the objective of this project is to build links, really to build bridges between the personalized medicine communities in Africa and in Europe. The project really aims to facilitate research and innovation collaboration between Europe and Africa in the field of personalized medicine, to foster joint projects and programs, and also to facilitate the participation of African institutions in the International Consortium for Personalized Medicine, the IC Permed. This is a 4-year project, and it is a project that is funded by the European Commission through its Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Program. So what's particular about this project is the composition of its consortium. So it is a consortium that is composed of both European and African institutions. So from the African side, we have, of course, the African Population and Health Research Center that is hosting the webinar today. We have the Institute for Health Surveillance and Health Epidemiological Surveillance and Training, the IRSF in Senegal. We have the South African Medical Research Council, the East, Central, and Southern Africa Health Community, EXA, with its headquarters in Tanzania, the National Commission for Science, Technology, and Innovation, NACOSTI, in Kenya, and the African Union Development Agency, AUDA-NEPAD. And on the European side, we have the coordinating institution, Innovatec, in Spain, the Instituto de Salud Carlos III, also in Spain, the National Research Agency, ANR, in France, the European Clinical Research Infrastructure Network, ECRIN, that is a pan-European organization, the INSERM, which is the National Research Institute for Biomedical Sciences in France, and the Ministry of Health in Italy. And sorry, I forgot one of the partners in the north of Africa, the Egyptian Center for Innovation and Research and Development. So the objectives of this project are many. The first objective is really centered around mapping, which is really to identify the scientific and policy priorities for personalized medicine in Africa, but also to identify and engage with the key stakeholders. Then we have an objective that's centered around cross-border collaboration, and this is really to identify what are the areas for the most important and priority areas for personalized medicine collaboration between Europe and Africa. Then we have a couple of objectives focused around science and transforming science into policy. The first is to foster and facilitate the integration of health research funding and policy organizations from Africa into the IC Permed. But the second is also to align and seek synergies with activities of the projects and programs that are already ongoing in Africa around personalized medicine. Then we have an objective to contribute to capacity building with training activities that address the relevant issues on personalized medicine in Africa. And then we really want to contribute to raising awareness about personalized medicine and really helping to highlight the benefits that closer inter and intra-regional collaboration can have for the implementation of personalized medicine. So here I've highlighted some of the activities that can be of interest, and these are activities that will allow EU-Africa Permed to reach its goals. So first of all, a series of mapping exercises have already taken place, and you can consult the outcomes of these exercises, but we've done mapping of stakeholders working already in personalized medicine. There's been a mapping of the scientific policy landscape, a mapping also of the specific needs that exist for personalized medicine, and a mapping of the existing training programs and opportunities. We are also organizing a series of regional and Pan-African stakeholder workshops to engage with the different institutions that are working on personalized medicine. We're actively working on the dissemination and promotion to raise awareness on personalized medicine. And we're also organizing, like today, a series of webinars, but also face-to-face trainings. So I'd like to invite you all to visit the project website, follow us on social media, but also sign up for the regular newsletter so that you can stay up to date with all the activities and be informed of what is coming next. So thank you all, and I wish you a very productive webinar.
Thank you, Paula, and that was really a great highlight of what we're doing in the project. And as she said, please go ahead and sign up for our newsletter, go onto our website to see more about what we've done, the policy brief that we've released on the mapping work that was done, and all the other activities that have been done over the past year. I'm now pleased and excited to invite Dr. Yao Bidiako as our first panelist to talk about tools and approaches for pharmacogenomics and diagnostics. This is exciting work that has started and speaks very close to the heart of what we're trying to do in the project. Over to you, Yao.
Thank you very much, Evelyn. I hope everybody can hear me and see my slides.
Yes,
okay, great. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share a little bit about what we're doing at Yamachi. and as it relates to, I guess, personalized public health or precision medicine, precision public health, whatever the term you choose to use. So I'll start my presentation sort of taking a bit of a step back from Yamachi initially, and just, I think probably this audience is relatively familiar with precision medicine or personalized medicine. But I think it's useful to think of personalized medicine in 3 different areas. So you can think of personalized medicine as improving early or detection of disease, or identifying patients at risk. You can have precision medicine approaches that focus on more early diagnosis, or more accurate diagnosis. And then, of course, you can think of precision medicine, how probably most people think about it, in terms of personalized therapies. So treatments that are particularly tailored to an individual's maybe genetic background, or particular risk stratification. Now, I'm sure I don't have to explain why Africa needs precision public health or precision medicine. These are just a few examples of why I think it's important. We are the most genetically diverse continent, with more genetic diversity than human genetic diversity than any other continent in the world. And so this creates situations where therapies are not always effective in different populations. And there are well-documented examples of when drug trials have not gone as planned due to unknown variants within the population. We also struggle at times or many countries, with traditional public health infrastructure. And I think this is actually a reason why, precision medicine may provide leapfrog opportunities for African countries, where we may not need to build all the traditional infrastructure, but can still improve the lives of our people, leveraging technology, leveraging new techniques, and new data approaches to still provide high quality care. And then, as Evelyn mentioned in her lead up, we have, really high burden of both infectious and non-communicable disease. And all of this is required, all of this suggests that we need new approaches to try to tackle this dual burden. Now, there are a number of barriers that, exist to fully realizing precision medicine in Africa. And I've listed a few, I won't read them all, but they all pretty much come under the problem of sustainability. I mean, how do we sustain approaches that require certain levels of expertise and technology and have certain costs associated with them? Now, as a biotech entrepreneur, I actually think that African biotech presents at least part of the solution. And I'm happy I've been invited. I couldn't help but notice that all the stakeholders I saw on the Africa map were all academic or sort of governmental institutions. I didn't identify any of them as a private biotech company. Now, I know we may be few and far between on the African continent, but I think that is something I would suggest, that African biotech actually provides an opportunity to draw the current stakeholders closer together, both public and private sector, as well as government, global pharma, and global partners. I mean, African biotech has an opportunity, is uniquely and potentially create the sustainability or the ecosystem that is required for precision medicine to really be adopted sustainably on the African continent. Ultimately, biotech, being business, creates jobs, is flexible and innovative by definition, because otherwise biotech companies don't survive. And I think importantly, is able to attract both local and international investment that allows it to scale. I think all of these will be required if precision medicine is really to be sustainably implemented across Africa. So Yamachi is the name of my company. We are primarily focused on oncology, but really what we are trying to do is we believe we're solving a problem of global significance, but from a uniquely African perspective. So the first question as a company is, how do we get global pharma to care about precision medicine in Africa? And we think that we need to solve problems that pharma will care about. Africa, as I already said, and you can see on the graph, is the most genetically diverse continent. This means, 99% of human genetic ancestry or genetic history occurred on the African continent, suggesting that African genomes are extremely valuable in the process of drug target discovery. And so what we are doing at Yamachi is building a Pan-African network of, really patients and clinicians across the continent, collecting both clinical and then genomic and other molecular data from people suffering from cancer, leveraging machine learning, computational biology, bioinformatics to identify new targets or new variants or new targets that could be used for developing new treatments or new diagnostic solutions for cancer. So really, this is leveraging the unique attributes of the African genetic or African genome, if you could call it that, to identify novel targets for the treatment of cancer, not just in Africa, but all over the world. And this is extremely important because current precision medicine, or current, if you look at genomics, whether in oncology or other areas, over 80% of the data available is from people of European or Caucasian ancestry, only 2% from people of African descent. And in fact, every other ethnicity is very poorly represented. And at Yamachi, we believe that Africa provides the key to this unlocking this diversity. I know I'm running up on time, but just to explain a little bit about the Yamachi model, as I said, we're building relationships across the continent. And really, we serve two groups of stakeholders. On the left-hand side is pharma and large CROs or corporate research organizations who want access to data and access to the IP that we can generate from our research. But then on the right-hand side is our network of patients and clinicians with whom we try to provide access to more affordable diagnostics, as well as access to clinical trials by leveraging the relationships we're able to form in the West. And we feel that by putting these two value propositions together, we create a business model that is sustainable, but also incredibly impactful. So this is to talk a little bit about specific projects we are carrying out. We have a number of projects, both in cancer, but also in other areas. So we have a Gates-funded project looking at vaccine efficacy among African patients. We did a bunch of COVID sequencing together with WACBIP at the University of Ghana and actually developed a dashboard, a first national dashboard to look at COVID variants. But then our most recent offering specifically in the diagnostic space is Sheba, which is a self-sampling based HPV screening service. HPV is responsible for majority of cervical cancers, second leading cause of cancer among African women. However, the variants that are most likely to cause cancer are not entirely very clear. So this is both a screening service, but also is allowing us to collect valuable information about what particular variants may be circulating in our communities and would potentially direct vaccine decision-making. And that obviously is an example of using medicine or using data to make our medicine more precise. So finally, does this model work? Well, we're a young company. We've only been in operation since April 2021, but I think we've charted a few milestones that I think are encouraging. We're the only company, we're only one of 15 companies out of 400 in the Y Combinator batch in summer 2021. We've raised our seed round of funding. We've established a lab in Ghana that is the first lab with human whole genome sequencing capacity. And now we have partnerships in 8 African countries, as you can see on the map. Currently raising our next round of funding, but have now also signed our first contract with a large top 3 pharma company that for a pilot project that will begin actually in beginning this month into the new year. So I think there are lots of encouraging signs from what we're doing, but I think ultimately it demonstrates the importance of African biotech in establishing sustainable precision medicine, and very happy to be part of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Yao, and actually for highlighting in terms of stakeholder, the gap that we have, or the gap that we've already identified in not necessarily presence, but engagement with the private sector. In the mapping exercise, we did engage a few, but it's you know, if you look at the report, it's a voice that is missing, but a voice that of course exists. And I think for your company, it's an example of how we can target a few things. You've highlighted the use of what we call precision medicine tools to check vaccine efficacy, to look at COVID variants and HPV cancer variants, which would allow for us to have more specific treatment and more specific diagnostics. So these are the things that we really want to highlight in terms of implementation on the continent. And the utility of that is really to rationalize use and to prevent wastage. So thanks, Yao. I'll now invite Professor Makani to give us a presentation on genomic research to improve health and find a cure for sickle cell disease, touch on SCD being a major public health problem in Tanzania, and not only Tanzania, but across the continent. This is probably, in my opinion, one of the oldest bodies of research being done on the continent in terms of precision medicine. So I'll invite Prof. Makani, who has a vast experience in working in this space. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kitao. So, and thank you for the organizers for inviting us to share the experience and what we see as opportunities and areas of implementation of personalized medicine. I'm going to focus on genomics and gene therapy for sickle cell disease in Africa. So one of the things I just need to do is shout out to Nikki Mulder, who is attending this webinar. Nikki is the principal investigator for H3A Bionet, as well as the new DSI Africa consortium looking at informatics and data in Africa. So one of the things about sickle cell disease is that it is considered to be a model for personalized medicine. And this is because of three reasons. The first is that it is a genetic disease. It's caused by a single gene mutation that causes abnormalities in red blood cells. And it was the first quote unquote genetic disease described. The second reason is that it has a huge public health burden. There are many children who are born with sickle cell disease, an estimated 300,000 per year. We estimate that there are between 5 to 7 million people with sickle cell disease in Africa. The majority of them are in sub-Saharan Africa and India. Unfortunately, the majority of these children, if they do not receive diagnosis and care, they will not reach the age of 18. And we estimate that there's a 50% mortality if you're not diagnosed. There are things that have been effective in terms of treatment of sickle cell disease, but they're limited. And so this is the third reason why this is a model disease for personalized medicine. So we can reduce morbidity and mortality by close to 70% in the first 3 years of life, just by newborn screening, managing infection, and providing prompt care and treatment of complications. But as you can see from this panel, from this last slide, you'll be able to see, and this is evidence from the US, where there has been an impact in the first 3 years of life. But if you look at the mortality in older children and in adults, there is no change in mortality over this period. We have one effective cure for disease, for sickle cell disease, that's bone marrow transplant, but there are limitations to this. And so this is an example of a condition that has limited interventions, and therefore there is an urgent need for personalized medicine. Exciting thing that happened 5 years ago in 2017 is that the first patient was cured from sickle cell disease using gene therapy. This was a study that was done in France with collaborations across the world, and it was done on a patient of African origin who received gene therapy and was cured from the disease. In 2018, we were contacted by patients community, by the government, by the private sector saying, can we get the cure? We heard that somebody has been cured in France. How and when will we get the cure? So since then, 5 years, there has been a lot of work that has gone on, and I'll go into this a little bit. But the important thing is that gene therapy is still experimental. It's still part of research. And there probably are now between 10 to 30 gene therapy trials at different levels, phase 1, 2, 3, that are ongoing, and none of them are happening in Africa. And so this is one of the areas that we as a consortium wanted to address. However, the way that we wanted to address it is that this cannot be an either or approach. So we're not going to say we're only going to focus on bone marrow transplant or only going to focus on gene therapy. We need to have a multidisciplinary or multi-pronged approach. So on one hand, we have to make sure that we implement and we introduce newborn screening, prophylaxis against infections such as malaria and pneumococcal disease, encourage people to use disease-modifying agents. In the past, it was only a hydroxyurea, but now there are 3 additional new disease-modifying agents. But what these do is that they just modify the disease. They do not treat it. Transplant is established, it's curative, it has its limitations, and therefore one of the things that we're really excited about is the possibility of in vivo gene therapy. So ex vivo gene therapy is what is currently being used, but in vivo gene therapy is really our goal in the next 5 to 10 years. So what has happened? The good thing is that we're not starting from scratch. In 2011, the H3 Africa initiative was started, and to look at how we can develop genomics capacity in Africa. And we developed a white paper and included sickle cell disease as a model disease. In 2017, as I mentioned, was when we had the first patient treated with gene therapy. And then these are the timelines of the various activities that have gone on. Importantly, is an investment by the NIH and the Gates Foundation at the African Union to invest in gene therapy for sickle cell disease and HIV. Thank you, Evelyn. So I'm almost done. In terms of the approach that we've taken, is that we've taken an integrated approach so that we coordinate activities in health, advocacy, research, and training, and we engage the patient community. These are the things that we have been able to do since 2011, and it's really areas in data, health, research, and developing skills in different aspects. We've also published reports, white papers, trying to address whether it's genomics, gene therapy, translating this into healthcare, as well as the cost, because the cost of gene therapy is estimated to be quite significant. I think finally, I'd like to end by emphasizing, and I think this is what Dr. Bediako also talked about, the importance of partnerships. And so we, in our approach, have really been keen to kind of engage government, the private sector, philanthropy, financing agencies, global agencies, and most importantly, the community of individuals with sickle cell disease. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to the discussion.
Great, and thanks, Julie. It's always impressive to see how far we've come, although not far enough, I think, in terms of handling sickle cell, which has been, of course, a huge problem that we've been trying to address over many years. But it's interesting that you talk about the fact that the first treatment was the first gene therapy treatment was done not in Africa, but then it was on an African patient, and ultimately you had patient groups coming in demanding or asking why this isn't being rolled out. So these are areas where we consider when we're thinking about what should precision medicine as a movement look like as we move forward. If patient groups are actually demanding the same, I think we maybe some of the work that we've been worried about in terms of the voice of the patient coming in really needs, it's already there. We just need to highlight some of these areas a bit more. So I've seen a few questions in the chat, and some of them I would hope, like Julie, for example, maybe you could pick up the question from Catherine in terms of the epidemiological and data issues, and why focus on the end of the personalized medicine if we have issues in terms of data. I think some of your presentation addressed that, but we'll go ahead and invite Godfrey to give his talk on improving cancer care and overall patient care quality through public health research and innovative technologies, so that then we can come back and start addressing some of the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you, everyone. I would like to just take you through the experience from research, but also from an experience from a junior researcher. My training was in medicine, and I am glad that I was able to participate in this webinar together with my teacher, Professor Julie. I was trained in medicine, but then I went for public health, and then now I'm doing global surgery. And during my training after medicine, the focus of my research was genetic and molecular characterization of the human HPG virus. This was a new virus in China, but also globally in other places it was already detected. And we used new areas of, methods. So we used sequencing, but also we studied, the interest was to study this new virus, but also its pathophysiology, because it was shown to be co-infected with patients with HIV and HCV. So then after my training, I went back to Tanzania. My training was in China. Then I did got a job in working as a researcher, clinical research coordinator for the cancer research project. And the main focus was to validate and implement a cancer biomarker testing. This was a point of care testing of breast cancer biomarkers using GeneXpert. So this was a new experience, but I think later, in addition to my training, I did training in implementation science. And when I was looking into precision medicine, now I could see now the link of everything, every training that everybody can get, that the precision medicine looking from the patient, but also going through the data, receiving the data, but then going back to impact the life of that patient. So this figure, I noted a few things. First is the need for equity. These are the new innovations. These are the patients that have been selected to participate in trials that have shown to be impactful. But then these innovations, how are they meeting the people who participated in that research, but really going further to how do we select patients to participate in these trials so that they go back and represent? Because now if you look into the precision medicine, we are speaking about the genetic component, and we see that our continent is very diverse. So how are we selecting our patient and then producing information that are going to impact the same patients? But also the need for data, also the need for infrastructure and governance. These are, and also the ethics. So whenever we are doing that, how able are we to develop this data from the genomic data to say computational or digital data? How are we able to keep them? So these are the question that I was facing when I was developing this talk. But also, are we having the infrastructure? It's nice that we see that in people from this webinar have developed some infrastructure which will enable this innovation to be developed in the context, but also to reach the people, looking into the connectivity with the patient networks and also the clinicians. But also the implementation science to practice. These are mostly we look into the genomics, and for a lay person, you will find that they will see that this is really into the lab. But how are we going to put those information in practice, put them into the implementation, and really come back and improve the care of the patient? So I think this is just a summary. I look into the disease burden, but we have a number of burdens of diseases. Some, for example, surgery, this is the area that I have worked a little bit more. How are you incorporating the precision medicine in surgery? We have a number of cancers, but then linking those to precision medicine. For example, I was interested in one paper looking into the relationship between surgery, but also the pain management, but the pain feeling. So those are the things that really go back and impact the patients. But then who are the key stakeholders who will be involved? So the funders, we want to have funding, but the challenge is, for example, it's a new disease that is being developed in a context, and say in an African context. Are we able to facilitate funding for this area of research? I would like to hear from Professor Makani, because this is also something that Sickle Cell faced initially, getting into acquiring this big funding and be able to impact these people who were initially thought to be few in numbers, but also I think the great opportunity in terms of collaboration, both internationally and interprofessionally. And also, I wanted to highlight the methods that we use. I think from the basic to trials, but really, how do we reach the patients? How are we impacting the new people who will be the leaders in implementation science, the mentorship? how are we mentoring our young generation to be able to conceptualize and be able to lead this implementation science in precision medicine? And also, what is next, really? What is next in terms of, we now know these are the areas that we want to invest on, but what are the new things that are going to come, because this is also innovation. So I would like only to pose this as a question, mainly as a question, but also to lead us in discussing, to understand from the patient to the trainees, to the infrastructures, but also the policy environment, and also what are the diseases that we are addressing? Are we really able to reach the need that we are trying? I think this is all that I prepared. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward for the discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Samba. That was really great. It's nice to see the integration of your training, I think, in terms of precision medicine. You've posed some questions that hopefully both Prof and Yao will perhaps address, and even those in the audience. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get our videos open, the panelists, so that we can answer some of the questions that we have. Godfrey has done a good job of really tying together the different areas that we need to think about when we're talking about precision medicine. And some of the questions coming in do actually ask the very first question, I think, about what we hear when we say precision medicine on the continent. I think this came from Kojo, is looking at our levels of poverty. Is it realistic for us to start thinking about precision medicine on the continent at this point in time? I mean, I argue that the example of where we've gone with sickle cell is really a point of us saying, look, hey, we can address different diseases at precisely that amount of precision that we need to address our local problems. So maybe, I don't know if Yao, you want to take that question of the barrier to taking this to scale in relation to where we are as a continent in terms of poverty. How realistic is it really to think about what you're proposing on the continent?
I think it's extremely realistic. I like to use the analogy of cell phones and landlines. Africa didn't wait for 70% landline penetration to switch to cell phones. In fact, most of us may never have had a landline. I remember we had one way back. It didn't really work. I think landline penetration in Africa didn't get probably over 20%. And yet our cell phone penetration, everybody has a cell phone now in most parts of Africa, and we got there much quicker than Europe or North America did. So I think I view precision medicine as another opportunity to leapfrog. I think of course, we have to do it systematically, and I think there will be specific elements of precision medicine that will be more suitable now than later. But I think there are many ways in which precision medicine may allow Africa to begin to provide better care for her patients without going through all the legacy systems that the West has developed and discarded. I don't see, in our work, for instance, in oncology, liquid biopsy is, NGS-based liquid biopsies are being put forward as the next generation of diagnostic testing. And we are seeing great advantages potentially of using that over traditional tissue-based diagnostics, which can be a bit susceptible to variation from formalin and all these other issues you have. And so just, sequencing directly from blood is much more stable in a Streck tube over a certain period of time. So that's just one practical example of a really cutting edge approach that I think, would be extremely useful in some of the settings we have in Africa. When it comes to cost, yes, of course. But I think once again, that is where partnerships between researchers, clinicians, and industry in Africa has an opportunity. And I think also it's actually a good business opportunity when it comes to how Africa interacts with the rest of the world. What I mean by that is in Europe and North America, especially in the US, health tech innovators innovate towards insurance reimbursement. Doesn't matter what it costs, provided insurance will cover it. So you can charge $5,000 for a diagnostic test. That's fine because insurance will pay for it. That doesn't work here. But I think African innovators who are pushed to try to make their technologies affordable we'll do so, and then this will begin to be attractive to the rest of the world. So I think there's an opportunity for us to address our problems, but also do it in such a way that actually may be business opportunities for the developed, quote unquote, developed world as well. So I think the time is now. Of course, it has to be structured, but I see no reason why we need to wait to develop legacy systems before we can start using precision medicine. It doesn't, that doesn't make any sense.
Maybe I'll ask the question in a different way, and this one I'll ask to Julie, because I'm sure you spent, gosh, over 25 years looking at one disease and being very specific, and your passion for it is well known. How do you argue about the return on investment of being as precise as you've been in your research? And why should we be more precise for other diseases, for example, and even more importantly, I think for the growing burden of non-communicable diseases that are coming into our space? Over to you, Julie.
Thank you, Evelyn. So this is really an interesting question in that in 2019, when the partnership between the NIH and the Gates Foundation was launched, investing in gene-based therapy. And this is $200 million. Sounds like a lot. It's not a lot, but everybody was excited because it was a substantial investment. If you compare how much money was put into H3 Africa as an example, H3 Africa is a fraction of the 200 million that was put in there. As soon as the meeting was over, obviously we were very excited about it, and we were given as examples. We as the community of people working in sickle cell disease, we were literally in the corridor attacked with exactly those same questions. How dare you think about gene therapy when you haven't even identified patients with newborn screening, when you don't have the data, when you don't have the information, how dare you think about that? This is just, and we just had to sit and listen to that. And do you know what happened as a consequence of that? Out of the $200 million that has been invested in gene-based therapy, not a penny has come into Africa. And so we, as people working in Africa, are the people who tell and say, no, we shouldn't do this. We should do this first, we should do this. And this is the reason why for us, our approach as H3 Africa, as Sickle in Africa, as people working, is that we're not saying stop implementing work that research, or not implementing interventions that work. We're not saying stop doing that and invest everything. No, we're saying there's no reason why we can't invest in both. So that's the first thing. In terms of data, Nikki's on the line. We've spent the past 11 years responding to that question. We don't have enough data. Okay, we'll go find the data. Here's the data. Oh, you don't have, people do not want to do this. Well, here are the people. We've done some qualitative research, and they want this intervention. And if they do not get the intervention in Africa, and this is something that I think we all need to say, then they're going to leave. They're going to leave, go to India, go to the US, go to Australia, go to Canada, and get the transplants, get the ex vivo gene therapy, and get the be quote unquote subjects of research outside of the continent. So we feel very, very strongly that one, this should be a multi-pronged approach. We're not saying ignore public health interventions. We've got to do this together. I think the second question that I wanted to kind of respond to is really with regards to the partnerships. I think without partnerships, it's really, really impossible to do this. And I'm talking about partnerships at different levels. First thing is that we need to listen to patients. What do they want? If a mother comes to you and says, I would like to get a transplant, it's not for us to say, no, you shouldn't get a transplant. They will leave and they will go and get the transplant outside of your country or outside of the continent of Africa. So we need to listen to patients and say what it is that they need. Working in cancer, yeah, you have the same situation. People will leave and go and look for the best cancer treatment that they need. So I think we really need to be a little bit mindful and listen to the community of patients, find out what it is that they would like, and then go forward. In terms of the partnership on the level of the investment, I think there is funding. If you look at the private sector, Pfizer recently bought out GBT, which is Global Blood Therapeutics, for billions of dollars because of investment in gene-based therapy. the amount of money that the private sector is putting in. And what we are saying as a community in Africa, not just for sickle cell disease, but for personalized medicine, is that it is, and I think Dr. Bediako outlined this very clearly, is that it's not appropriate to have the R&D, the preclinical work being done outside of Africa. It's not appropriate to do the phase 1, phase 2 trials outside of Africa. You've got to do them in, and we've got to find a way of doing this together in partnership. Thank you. I'll stop because I could go on and on and on.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, for those of us who I think on this webinar, we've had that question asked over and over again. And the answer is always the same. We have two just highlighting what you've said is two things. We can choose to be left behind because the global movement on precision medicine is there, and it's addressing global problems, but not necessarily from an African lens. And if we exclude ourselves because we say we have other better, higher, more important priorities, we're going to be left behind anyway, instead of tapping to the resources that have been put for elsewhere. Yao, you have your hand up. Do you want to perhaps add on to what Julie said?
Yes, I just wanted to add one point to what Prof. Makani said. She mentioned GBT and Pfizer. Now imagine if GBT was an African company. That is an African company that just got bought by Pfizer for billions of dollars. So I think we need to look beyond the problems. Investing in some of these issues is more than just solving the sickle problem. It is building the ecosystem, the capacity that creates transformation of economies in Africa. So I think we need to look beyond just the simple problem we are solving, as if these investments come and we build this capacity on the continent, that ends up leading to innovations in many, many areas, and it ends up building value on the continent. Science has the capacity to build incredible wealth, incredible commercial and financial value. But that only happens when the initial R&D and the IP is owned on the continent. So we need companies like GBT studying, yes, sickle is predominantly an African problem. Now, if that company was here, maybe CEO, Professor Julie Makani, now you have that value. Pfizer now buys it. That's what Big Pharma does. But guess what? All that money is now on the African continent and can be put towards new problems. But if you always view Africa as the place to do your last mile and do a bit of hand washing and do, nothing wrong with those things, but that doesn't build IP. There's no IP in hand washing. There's IP in gene therapy. And so we need to do both at the same time. And guess what? Eventually, then we can fund our own public health initiatives. And we don't need external funding for that to do things that, to be honest, we should be able to do on our own. But we have to build that value. And I think that's the power of science and technology. But the investments have to be on the continent. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So maybe, Godfrey, I'll come to you and ask the question around data. I think Catherine Chobutungi put it in the question and answer about the focus on precision medicine rather than on the epidemiological data that's missing. Should we wait to ensure we have enough data in enough countries to apply specific tools that we need? Or is this part of the ecosystem that Yao mentioned? What's your thinking? Over.
Thank you, Evelyn. I think there is no time to wait. These are the innovations that are ongoing. These are the new products which are resulting from those innovations. And we always speak about globalization of care, globalization of whatever, but also speaking about health equity, making sure that we make sure that whatever is happening, if it is bringing good quality to care, everybody has the opportunity to access it. So I think it is important that we continue looking for ways to get this data if they will help us understand the disease mechanism, help us come up with new innovations so that they can come back and impact the people. And I think I like the idea of having everything or these innovations be able to be found in the places where they are needed, because I think sometimes it is better when you produce something that is needed for the population that you have, rather than waiting for someone to come and say, we want to do this. You don't know what are the ideas behind, but also you don't know whether these are really responding to your needs. So I think it's important that we understand our population, we understand our context, and we find the resources that will respond to the needs. And yes, to collaborate with others, but making sure that if there is a new innovation, we either have the capability to produce them, or we can have the access because we can diagnose locally and be able to access those medications. So this goes into even the ethics, allowing patients to participate, creating those platforms for patients to participate also, but also the governments to, I don't know, I would also like to hear Yao's experience, but I think how are the policies existing to support the local innovations, local companies to be able to be on place? Or are we really supporting mainly if something is already established elsewhere, or are we supporting the concept that is needed in the context? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Godfrey. I'll ask perhaps Julie to address an issue around patients that I think combines a couple of questions that have been asked. I think one was on specific populations that are already missing in terms of access to care, for example, adolescents. And then there's another question that talks about risk communication that surrounds illness. And I'll add on to that and say the voice of the patient. When we started this mapping exercise from an EU Permed perspective, it was really hard to find those when you go to Europe, for example, you have a lot of patient groups that are involved in the precision medicine conversation. What are we doing to ensure that the naysayers, the naysayers on precision medicine don't influence what patients need to demand in terms of what they can get out of precision medicine? And do we have, you have your sickle cell disease, for example. Are the young people there, are they aware of the potential to how they're being treated? These are the things that we need to think about in terms of communications, and importantly, as part of the ecosystem that will allow precision medicine to become the norm rather than the exciting little shiny box that Africa could utilize at one point in time. Over to you, Julie.
Thank you. So as I'm a medical doctor, I'm a physician, and I'm also a scientist. And I worked in clinical epidemiology. So I spent my PhD looking at clinical epidemiology, looking at data, and then worked with Raphael and Nikki as part of H3 Baronet. So this is work that we've been doing in terms of looking at the epidemiology or describing the epidemiology of disease at clinical level and at population level. And when I hear the comment that we don't know or we don't have enough data, I find it extremely, extremely frustrating, because we do have the data. It may not be accurate. In some areas, it might need to be improved. We do have data. From a perspective as a physician scientist, working with patients, having family members with disease, whether it's cancer, sickle cell disease, or other conditions, in that it's really inappropriate to go and say, well, I've made a diagnosis, and this is one of the things that is against public health kind of, if you screen or identify individuals, you have to offer them something, you have to give them care. And so it's completely inappropriate to say, no, what we're doing, we've just received $5 million grant, and all we're doing is we're collecting data so that we know the burden of disease. You say, but I really need penicillin, or I need blood transfusion because I've got severe anemia and I will die. And the response is that, no, right now our priority is establishing the burden of disease. So we need to work together. And this is the comment that I made, is that we really need to work together. We're not saying stop funding X, Y, Z and start funding this. We're saying we have to have a multi-pronged approach. And the reality is that there is enough money out there. When you look at patients, and again, this is the thing, lots and lots of pushback. This is even before the 2019 launch. We were kind of saying we need to provide these services for patients with sickle cell disease, with cancer in our country. The number of patients who leave Africa to go outside of Africa to get care, specialized care, this is not, is huge. If you were to use that money in Africa to improve the services. You go to Ghana now, they've got a state-of-the-art hospital at University of Ghana. If you in both Kumasi and in Accra. If you come to Tanzania, we've got centers of excellence that are working in areas, and we've cut down the number of patients who need to leave the country to go and get, whether it's gene therapy, this is cellular therapy, CAR-T therapy, or anything else, or getting personalized medicine for cancer, or getting transplants. So if we do not provide those services, the patients will leave. And so I feel very, very strongly that this concept that we don't have money in Africa, we're poor in Africa, is incorrect. We have patients leaving Africa and going to spend $60,000 to $100,000 for a transplant. We have patients going and spending $300,000, and they raise the money in ways that we need to look at. But this concept that says we don't have the money, we're poor people, no, that is incorrect. And this is why it's really great to have the private sector and work that Dr. Bediako, we've got 54 Gene, we've got people who are saying we're going to build centers of excellence in Africa. You can do your research here, you can be here, you don't have to leave the country. And so that's the thing that we need to do. Thank you.
Great. I'm aware that we've run out of time. I mean, it was way too short, but I think you've actually responded in a way that Catherine Chobutungi has also mentioned, that, you know, we need to start collecting data with the added value that precision medicine can add. And I think that's where we're getting to, saying, okay, you know, you give a shout out to data science, the DSI initiative with Nikki and the team. There's also the other project that's been funded for morbidity, that's looking at using data and mortality and morbidity data on the continent to make more precise diagnostics. And there are many other initiatives that are embedded in the partners that we have in this initiative that actually will allow for us to exploit data and to perhaps improve our goals of data collection, to ensure that we're actually the patient is benefiting from that data we're collecting. So I'll give you each 1 minute really to think, to say and mention the one thing you really want the audience here to go home thinking about, in terms of, we are in Africa, this is what we're doing. You've given us really good case studies. And so, you know, you've demonstrated also that we have the capacity, because I think that's the big issue also, is the capacity doesn't exist, so we can't get to industry. So maybe I start with you, industry, you know, our entrepreneur in the room. Yao, what's that one thing you want the audience to go thinking about?
Thank you, Evelyn. I think personally, the one thing that I'd like people to go away with is, I mean, I think Prof. Makani also talked about it, partnership. Whether in the private sector, the public sector, academic research, and otherwise, we're only going to do this as Africans if we work together. It's really, really difficult, believe you me. It's extremely hard to do this. It's extremely hard to make the investment case. Most biotech investors don't look at Africa, and most impact investors don't look at biotech. And so that is the struggle that some of us find ourselves. We're in a no man's land where impact investors who invest in Africa think we are too complicated and too sciencey for Africa. They don't think we can hack it. And then biotech investors who understand our science don't understand Africa and think, yeah, you can't do this in Africa, you don't have power. And I think the way we are going to succeed is through partnering with academic institutions, with global partners who have an interest in seeing Africa move forward. And so my challenge to global partners is, if you really care about Africa, you really then should care about the transformation of African economies. It's not just about solving malaria and deploying a malaria vaccine. It's about making sure that people have better livelihoods and have access to better jobs. Now that happens through economic transformation, and R&D is a significant part of that. 75% of US R&D is private business. So Africa needs a thriving, sustainable private business sort of sector, private research sector. And I think it is only through partnerships that we get there, because traditional avenues of investment are really difficult for us to attain because of the biases that we meet. And I think through partnership with established institutions who are doing research, if they can see the value in a private company like mine and partner with us, that gives us the credibility that we require, but also gives them access to a new host of potential partners. I think together we can realize the Africa that we're all striving for.
Great. Godfrey, what's your take-home message you want people to go home with?
Thank you, Evelyn. I think for me, I would say there is no time that is perfect for implementing precision medicine in Africa. There is the need, there is the people. So this is the time. So whenever we think of doing our projects, for example, if it is addressing diagnosis, we should think the whole continuum. If you diagnose that patient has to receive care. If you are training a person, you should make sure that those people who are getting trained in precision medicine will be able to come back and find some areas where they can utilize those knowledge. So I think there should be a continuity in whatever that we do to make sure that that ecosystem from the diagnosis to implementation to the impact is complete. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And back to you, Julie, on your parting shot.
So I'm really glad that Yao and Godfrey talked about partnerships, that talked about people and training and all that. My thing is just patience, in that it is inappropriate to tell a patient, no, you cannot get this treatment because you're too poor, or because you're in Africa, or because you're in a particular kind of place. It is, for me, that's the bit that is just wrong. And when we say, what are we going to do as a clinician who's working in this area? My response is to say, you know what, if I'm able, and these are the targets, we're starting very small, let's start and say 5 countries in Africa, you do 10 transplants this year. That's all, just 10 transplants a year. And then we'll slowly scale that up. It means that we will have an impact. We will show that we have been able to do it. And then we will be able to say, we don't need to send patients to France or to another country to have participating in a study, or for, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we really need to think about patients and listen to patients, listen to patient communities, listen to what it is that they want before we take that arrogance as doctors, as scientists, of saying, no, what you should do is this first, Patients, if you talk to patients, and this is what we've been doing, for the past 5 years, in H3 Africa, we've been doing that for the past 11 years, is that if you talk to patients, if you talk to communities, they will tell you what it is that they want. And so I think we need to have them at the center and then respond to that. And this will bring in everything else. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists, and thank you everyone for attending today. I think for me, what has been said really is we cannot allow our own fear of what personalized medicine and the cost of personalized medicine would be we cannot allow that to drive more inequities in healthcare as we already have. This may be our chance to actually leapfrog and address issues at a more personalized level, and really at a more specific level. The specificity that is needed for Africa really is probably only through some of the tools that we're generating through here. So thank you very much, Yao, Julie, and Godfrey, and Paula. And thank you all consortia partners who have been in and out, and for everyone who's attended this webinar. Please feel free to reach out to us on email. We will get you the recording after this, and we look forward to more engagement. We do have a next webinar coming up in February, so plugging in for that too. Take care and do have a good evening. Thank you. Bye, everyone.